Hey there. Hi. So I just thought I'd stop in and make a few unprepared remarks as an addendum to what I was talking about last week about what to write, or my opinion about what to write. I want to talk about horror films, which I think are really the thing I would advise most, particularly for beginning writers, or even if you have a few scripts under your belt, maybe you haven't sold one yet, but if you want to break into the business, I think that the subject that has the best chances of breaking in is horror, and I'll tell you why. First of all, there's this sort of thing going around where the people are saying horror is back. Well, was never gone anywhere. Frankly, I mean, horror's always been successful. Of course, in COVID, the theaters were shut down, so it didn't play. But in every year since before and since, horror's been very strong. It always will be very strong. I think that's for a number of reasons. One of them is that uh, it is every generation, and every generation really kind of means not generational like every 7 years is what they used to say a generation was, or something like that. But every generation is almost every 2 years. Because what I look at as every generation, particularly for horror films, is every 2 years. Because that's the years people are in 11th grade and 12th grade, and I think those are the largest group that go to see, the largest quadrant, or not quadrant, the largest sector of audience that goes to see horror films. And every 2 years it's different, so there's turnover. And they all want their own horror film. They don't want their big sister or their big brother's horror film. They want their own horror film. They want their own scary film they can go to the theater and see and make their own. So that's why there is always going to be this tremendous turnover in horror films, going to be this tremendous appetite, I believe. And not only that, but horror is great because there's obviously a tremendous upside to it. I mean, the biggest upside, I think, of any movie genre at all in the world is horror. We've seen this a million times, whether it's Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Project, Megan recently, Smile, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on and on. And the upside is, we're talking about sometimes as much as or more than 100x, which is absolutely huge. No other movie has that. I mean, not even, say, the Mission Impossible movies or Jurassic Park or Star Wars or anything. Nothing has 100x, and that's a really great investment. And people are well aware of that, and they want to get into it. There's a lot of people that are, the studios obviously are aware of it because they have their pods who are making them, the Ghost Houses of the world, Atomic Monsters of the world. They know they're valuable, the Blumhouses of the world, they know they're valuable, so they're trying to make them. But there's also tons of other people around that are aware of the tremendous value proposition that horror films are. And they're willing to invest money in them. And that's because, clearly, horror films don't have to be made for a lot of money. And they shouldn't be made for a lot of money. If they are made for a lot of money, then I think you have a problem. I think the cheaper a horror movie is, the better it is. And then there's something else, too, which, of course, is that this is really the key thing. And that is that horror films, you don't have to cast. You don't have to get Tom Cruise in it. You don't have to get anybody in it. In fact, it's my personal opinion that casting any known faces in a horror film only diminishes your potential box office, because obviously it takes away from the reality that, like, hey, I saw that girl, I saw that guy in some other film, and the baggage they may have with it. So these things make horror one of the easiest things to get made. So if you can contain your budget, again, you need to know budget, you need to contain it below $5 million, because horror sells on its concept, the cleverness of its concept or the uniqueness of its execution. One of those two things, not the star and not the budget, except unless it's low. I mean, the lower the better. The worse the movie looks in some senses, the better. The more gonzo it looks, the better. There's something else interesting about horror as well, especially for people who are breaking into the industry. And that is that the horror script is an interesting one. I've never heard anybody make this observation before, but I'll make it, and some may argue with me about it. But horror films are the only films that I can think of that I believe are two-act films. And what that means is that there's clearly always a setup, where the kids are going out to the cabin for the weekend or whatever it is. There's always a setup. But then after that, once you cross that first act mark, it's really all a chase or a exercise in survival, or you name it, until resolution comes. Some films may have it, but I see no true third act acceleration in horror films. You look at, if you sit down and read the script for A Quiet Place, it's quite interesting because I think it's only like 60 pages long. It's a very odd script, and it really didn't have structure in it. And so I say this only because if you don't have a ton of scripts under you, you don't really understand the concept of structure, which very few people actually do, because it's an elusive structure concept, as I've mentioned a million times before, and it doesn't really truly exist. It only exists in the human perception. There's no mathematical way to identify structure. So it can be very difficult to understand structure, but it's something that everybody should strive to understand and think about, because it's very, very important in movie making. But if you're very passionate about movies and you're passionate about screenwriting and you want to get started before you really have your arms around all the aspects of screenwriting, especially the big bugaboo, which is structure, horror is a great place to start because the screenplays are extremely simple. And the other thing is they're short. If your horror script is longer than 90 pages, you better watch out. If it's 100 pages, you've got a serious problem, probably. And that's because they're really two-act films, and they don't really have enough material. There's not enough meat on the bone to make a true three-act movie. And that's not anything against horror films. That's just the nature of them. They are the sort of, in so many senses, the fast food or the fast fashion of movies. And that's why people enjoy them. That's why young people enjoy them. They like to go out there, like to be scared, like to then move on and go enjoy their night. And so for those reasons, the fact that they're made cheaply, so therefore there's a lot of people who want to take a swing at it and potentially generate those massive upsides that they have. And there's one other thing too, and that is that because the appetite for horror is so large around here in America and around the world, there's an enormous appetite for it in terms of content. And as we know now, there's an enormous amount of content consumption going on online as well. So first, I didn't say this, but the other great thing about horror is it's theatrical. It's fundamentally can be theatrical. It's still theatrical. There are not many movies that are theatrical anymore. So many of them, even, sort of big movies that cost $50 million are getting punted to the streamers. Now, I know that some of the streamers or some of the studios are having sort of come to Jesus discussions with themselves about whether that's a good idea or not. But nonetheless, currently, lots of big movies are being punted to the streamers, to the streaming platforms. Whereas horror, because it is an inherently, like comedy, inherently theatrical experience, you want to go and see it with your friends, you want to make an event out of it, you want to be scared together. I remember seeing Paranormal Activity, and it was sold out, and it was really an incredible experience because the entire audience becomes a single organism, and that's the wonderful thing about theatrical. And if you make a really good film, you write something very clever and something very new, a very new idea, a very fresh idea, or the execution is extremely fresh, or better off, both, you have a relatively good shot at theatrical. And that's kind of what the dream is, right? To have your movie in a theater. Not everybody wants to just have it go punted straight to streaming. But nonetheless, having your movie go on streaming, whether it's on Hulu or Netflix, that's not so bad either. I mean, you've got your first movie made, and you can watch it, and you can point to it and say, that's mine. And so that's important as well. So the inherently theatrical nature of horror is great. The fact that the budgets are so low is great. The fact that it doesn't need to be cast to be made, you don't have to hook some actor to make it, is great. I mean, there's lots of great actors who are just dying to have a great role, and they'd probably love to be in your movie. And the scripts are really simple and can be written quite easily and very quickly. So, if you're genuinely interested in screenwriting and you want to get your career started and dive in, I recommend horror. Even people who have had a few movies made, still, horror is something, a great idea. Write horror. It can't hurt. And you can do it so quickly that it doesn't take a lot of time off your clock. Anyway, that's my opinion about horror. You may or not, may or may not. See you guys next time.